Okay, welcome back to Cubs and Culture for February 7th, 2018, discussing Midnight Cowboy and whether or not it's homophobic. Okay, so for something to be homophobic, it's not enough for the portrayal of LGBT people to be negative or messy. It has to be, or even necessarily stereotypical. It has to be. I think it needs to be a little bit more stronger than that. That it has to be LGBT people are held up as objects of scorn in the context of the narrative, and I feel like the book Midnight Cowboy. It's a lot easier to argue that the book is homophobic because Joe's Buck's last client, male client, who he kind of maybe murdered, is left ambiguous. Seems to have been trying to provoke him as sort of a masochistic sexual desire, which is incredibly sort of troubling as a representation of queer people. And then the other sort of really obvious, the other sort of pretty explicitly gay character is Perry, and Perry's a completely manipulative, queenish sort of character. So, like, I don't think... So, for the book, it's a lot easier because even though I think Joe is sort of gayer in the book, the queer characters seemed much more held up much more as objects of scorn. Now, in the movie, this has been shifted somewhat. So there's basically two different explicit gay sequences in the film. The first one is with a college student who hires Joe on the street, and they go to a theater, and the college student performs oral sex on him, etc. He's played by Bob Balaban, and then there's another sequence in the bathroom where he actually doesn't have the money, and so Joe kind of threatens to beat him up, etc. And threatening to take his watch. And so that's the first one. And the thing is, Bob Balaban, as that character, the college student, he's not... The thing is, he's not the first... Like, this is after the cast sequence. So, like, even though it's a gay man ripping off the main character... sort of by lying to him, that occurs after cast, and so you can almost see it as like a learning curve on Joe's part, where in the cast sequence, he forgot to ask for the money up front, and this time he asked for the money, but he didn't get the cash right away. So it's a learning curve. So it makes sense sort of dramatically. The thing is, I don't think it has a lot to do with how Balaban's performance, which is he's only in the movie for 4 minutes, maybe 4 or 5 minutes. You kind of get the sense that this poor kid, it's not inconceivable to me that character, especially since he gets sick, sick to his stomach, that was the first time he was intimate with another man. So I'm like, if he sort of virgin, so it doesn't come across as sort of like malicious representation. It comes across as sort of awkward or unsure of himself. And so in some ways, even though the college student rips off the main character and that's not cool, you understand, like, it's a sympathetic in the sense that you feel that, like, it's not from a malicious intent. It was just, he didn't know how to process this, and that the college student in himself is fractured in this way. So there's that. Then there's also Townie, who's the final client. This is the guy that Joe Buck almost possibly killed, maybe killed. I don't know. It's left ambiguous. In the movie, he's quite clearly much more so in the book. This notion's in the book as well. It's unfortunately sort of ruined by having, basically when Joe's beating him up, the guy gets off, in the book, which kind of ruins the point because it turns him just entirely into like a masochist, which isn't okay given like that. Introducing that idea, it's introduced in a novel earlier than that. That Joe could possibly find clients because of him being a cowboy that had that sort of interest. But that idea is introduced so late, and it's so like it doesn't really belong there. It turns the final townie from into like a very creepy old man. Anyway, so this is shifted in the book. The ever so slight hint is left in the movie because Townie still says thank you at one time after Joe punches him, which it's not because it's much more subdued. But in any case, in the movie it comes across Townie ends up being, I think, sympathetic, because of he seems to be religiously tortured. And has repressed desires himself. Like he asked Joe to leave, but come back because he's trying to be good. It seems very much like a very lonely sort of man who's been sort of repressed because of religion. And so there's that. So at least for those two characters in the movie, I don't necessarily think they're positive portrayals, but they're not. They're solid portrayals of two gay men, or presumably gay men, who themselves, because of society and the time period, are sort of busted. Because everyone in this film is sort of busted. And so it's hard to see it as homophobic as opposed to, it's more misanthropic than it is homophobic. So there's that. Now, the other sort of thing about this is, as I said, there's a way of looking at the central relationship as sort of a queer, like both Ratso and Joe are sort of queerish characters because Ratso has that fantasy sequence connected to when he's sort of watching Joe in a hotel, finally trying to hook up with a female client. And then he has this, Ratso has this fantasy sequence where it begins with Joe Buck running towards him shirtless. In any case, it's mostly about the idea of him heading to Florida. But in any case, given that, it's just enough of a hint of, hint, given the rest of the text of the film, that it's easy to sort of see it as some sort of also pseudo-quasi sexual fantasy on Ratso's part. Okay, because here's the thing. The concept of gay or queer is new and it's been sexualized, but of course there's different types of loves or different types of relationships. So just going to Greek for a second, you have eroticism or erotic, which is about sex, and then you have agape, which is spiritual. You have eros, which is sex, and then you have agape, which is spiritual or deep kinship, and then you have philia, which is friendship or acquaintance. And it's really easy to sort of have if not homosexual relationship, then a homoerotic or homo-agape relationship in Midnight Cowboy between Joe Buck and Ratso, where they both characters are so fundamentally fractured and alienated from society that the only sort of people that they end up being able to have sort of emotional intimacy with are each other, which of course is very, very agape, homoerotic, the homo romantic, not homoerotic, and so there's all that sort of tension. So at the end of the day, it seems to me to be sort of the emotional connection between them isn't just. It's a deeper spiritual connection than that you should apply the word familia to, which is for friendship. To call this relationship a friendship, I think, does it a disservice. It's deeper than that. So even if both characters are straight, which I think is the easiest way of reading the text, it still comes across as sort of a queer relationship. Because here are two straight men who get all their sort of other intimacy needs met through each other, sort of, kind of. It's busted and fucked up because it's Midnight Cowboy. So there's that. So because of that, it's really, like, one of the things I like about it is that the movie is kind of very messy. Now, the other sort of thing about this is, in the book, it comes clearer because Joe is a little bit gayer, but you can also see, excuse me, Joe in the movie having actual same-sex desire, given some of the shots and whatever. There's this category called ego-diagnostic homosexuality, which is basically, I'm gay, I'm queer, and that I hate myself so much for that I have to beat the fuck out of someone else. One way of reading the final scene is Joe was, that it was in a moment of ego-diagnostic homosexuality that Joe was so upset about having same-sex attraction that he actually attacks his gay client who actually pays him. Etc. So there's that sort of dynamic. I'm saying the film is not homophobic, but it's complicated and messy, which I think would piss off the left because it's not a glowing sort of representation of LGBT folks. It's a much more messy, ambiguous, complicated portrayal. Okay, so I feel like I'm just rambling, so see you in a bit. Cops and Culture, out.